Got my guy Sean Cunningham, Fox 40 Sean Cunningham, joining the show. Sean, I heard you're a little sick today. You feeling all right, man?
Who said that?
I think you may have.
Yeah. Okay. I do have a little thing going on with my voice. Makes me sound a little deeper today. So
Yeah, you sound grown up.
What's that?
You sound grown up.
I sound like I just gone through puberty again.
Yeah.
Like I'm kind of just going. Yeah. Well, maybe I never late bloomer.
Exactly. How's your March Madness viewing experience so far? You were flexing yesterday that you're top of the Jason Ross bracket so far.
In the Just for Fun pool, yeah, I total domination by myself, 15-1. That living proof that you don't need to know what the hell you're doing to be able to have fun in this thing and maybe come away a winner. But just day one, and I think the key to it was not paying attention at all to the scoreboards or any games. Yesterday, I didn't get to see a single game, and that's going to change today when the Duke Blue Devils take the court.
I was going to say, was it intentional that you didn't watch? There were games on around us.
No, man, they were around us, and I could kind of look up and maybe see a score or two, but it was not busy time of year. This 7-game homestand is a whopper. So yeah, just a lot going on. There were a lot of storylines, obviously, last night, as you probably laid out earlier in the show, and certainly we saw the return of Kevin Huerter and Zach LaVine playing against his former team for the first time. So just a lot of things like that to sort through in the local news aspect of things with the Sacramento Kings.
Absolutely. You mentioned it, busy during this homestand, and that includes the Kings beating the Cleveland Cavaliers, league leading, or at least right there with OKC, handing them their 13th loss of the season on Wednesday. And then you have a back-to-back that ends up being a loss to the Chicago Bulls. You mentioned Kevin Huerter's revenge game there, but what do you sort of make of the Jekyll and Hyde nature of this team, and specifically, I guess, this back-to-back? You know, do you look at it as playing down to your level of opponent? How much do you factor in it being a back-to-back? Just how do you try to make sense of what happened in these last two games?
Yeah, I think trying to do that, much like this Kings coaching staff and front office, and even the media around it, it's the type of I wouldn't recommend it to folks, because trying to make sense of anything this Kings team does is probably a futile experience, and one that will make you want to hit your head against the wall. But I find it fascinating, because really I think it all just comes down to the give a damn from this team, and really them coming out the right way. And it's funny, we haven't seen them of late come into a game like they did against the Bulls, where you get off to this really crazy start. Not a lot of defense maybe in those first few moments from either team. I mean, but they came out just smoking. You saw the three ball falling, assist numbers were up. The pace was just light. I mean, it was lightning pace. We haven't seen that in a while. So it was fun to watch, and certainly you saw this team capable of putting up some points, and maybe they're feeling good coming off of the Cavs win the night before against literally coming into that game, Cleveland had the best record in the NBA, and handing them their 13th loss ended up, with Oklahoma City winning, they fall to second best record in the league. But I don't think it's a rise to the level of opposition like we've seen from this Kings team historically, because I think they're kind of, they're taking care of the teams this season that you would expect them to, for the most part. Certainly that hasn't been a trait for Sacramento over the past few years, but this team, for whatever reason, has been able to capitalize on those moments, and sometimes they fall flat against some of the teams that are obviously the steeper opposition, especially since the trade. Now, obviously, a win over the Cavs, a win over the Celtics notwithstanding, those were probably the biggest moments of the year. Maybe you could throw in some Houston victory in that regard as well. But this team is just crazy. Like, it's got just a weird vibe to it, that when all of a sudden they let go of the rope, things can really kind of spiral out of control. And I just think it comes down to the give a damn. I have this thing, and Brenden, you've seen this, and probably a lot of Kings fans have. I have a moment where I like to go into the locker room before the game, and Doug Christie has always a message, and usually it's an acronym or something like that, where it's on the whiteboard and it's something that they're preaching. And obviously, protect home court is something that remains up there throughout this 7-game homestand, at least through these first few games. But last night's was IOC, and wasn't quite sure what that is. I'm still not sure.
Yeah, I haven't debunked that one either.
But I think I actually just had looked it up because, or IOI, I said IOC, I was IOI meeting. And so I actually just looked it up, and then there's a financial term I think that comes to mind, and it's called indication of interest. And I think that applies to the Sacramento Kings. Now, I think that's maybe the thing that sticks out the most in terms of their give a damn, is what I call it. And last night, you have somebody that's as frustrating like Zach LaVine. Like, he needs to be, in my mind, the number one scoring option on this team in order for them to have success. And it's clearly where his bread is buttered. This is what the type of player he's known for. And he goes out there and he has 4 shots in going into the fourth quarter, and he's 0 for 4. Finally got a couple things to drop, a dunk, kind of get him going a little bit. And obviously he was out the night before with some personal things, and he's handling that, and it could have affected him in this game. But certainly it's something we've seen from him since he's arrived in Sacramento, where where's the guy that is chucking shots? Where's the guy that is taking over and trying to be that elite scorer that we've come to know from him during his time in the NBA? And we're not seeing it. And I think they really, really need his presence on the offensive end to get them going. And I think that's the thing that sticks out most with this since the trade deadline. It's like, if you have to look at something that is lingers, I mean, certainly they're a team that's like a 500 basketball team, but that is, in my mind, the biggest problem is their give a damn or indication of interest and getting Zach LaVine shots.
Yeah, indication of interest sounds like Doug Christie was listening to an audiobook on the way in and, found a good quote and decided to roll with that. But no, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, obviously, Zach LaVine only shooting the ball 9 times. You were asking about it a lot in post game. And I think that Malik had a good response. Everybody did, really, DeMar as well. But Malik specifically, with being the point guard of this team now, and obviously he was rolling yesterday. This was his career high in regulation, if you don't count that outside of that double overtime regulation game against the Clippers a couple years ago in that OG Beam team year. But, how much do you look at it as it being a factor of there not being a traditional point guard on this team? And what have you thought of how Malik has adjusted to that? Because it seems like there has been a little bit of a, he talked about the mental adjustment that he's been going through recently.
Yeah, I always say the thing you don't want to see from any athlete is to see that they're thinking or having to think about what they're doing when they're in action, be it on the court, on the field, whatever it is. And especially in basketball, like, it just has to be read and react. It just has to come naturally. You have to be able to play freely and do what you do. And if you see them kind of having to noodle things through, that isn't usually a recipe for success. So I admire the challenge that's in front of Malik and the way he steps to it, because, if I sound like a broken record, to me, he's always the most important player on this Kings team in terms of what he represents to this roster and this club and this franchise. I mean, he's a fan favorite at this point. And him having to navigate when to be a point guard, when to be a scorer, when to be a playmaker is really tough. And so, I mean, even Doug Christie alluded to it not that long ago in terms of what the first 5 minutes should look like from Malik Monk before he has some subs come in and then becomes maybe that scoring option that we've seen contend for 6th man of the year. So, it's murky. It's something that is a little bit different for him. But that's why that analogy that Doug Christie uses so many times is so apropos, is the fixing the plane while it's in the air. It's like, we all know that this isn't a complete team. That, they fired a head coach. They've lost another assistant coach. They traded the franchise player. They've got so many player acquisitions that are still trying to work things through. You don't have the benefit of a training camp, and it's like starting you at the 50-yard line and say, okay, go. They need more seasoning. It's not quite ready yet. And so they're trying to make the most of it. And that's why, I don't want to say that the season is completely lost, because certainly you can find moments and you can find a lot of evaluation period in this season to where it's not a complete failure, or, you're certainly going to have to evaluate your head coach at the end of the year. You're definitely going to evaluate roster pieces on the end of the year. You're going to evaluate your front office at the end of the year. So I think all of this kind of builds to to those final decisions that'll be made when the season comes to an end, whenever that is. But certainly the lack of point guard play is absolutely part of it. And in my mind, and let's be honest, the Sacramento Kings have run into injuries as well. I mean, Domantas Sabonis is somebody that the ball has to move through, and learning to play with Domantas Sabonis is a bit of a learning curve for some people. And so, yeah, I could probably chalk it up to that. But at the same time, Zach LaVine is a guy who can go get you a bucket and create his own opportunities. I mean, him and DeMar DeRozan do that about as well as anybody in the league. So, I don't want to totally lean on that as an excuse, because I think even this Kings team expects more of Zach LaVine in that regard.
Sean Cunningham from Fox 40 joining us. Sean, you mentioned the give a damn, and I wanted to go back to that for a second because you kind of just laid it out. They've had a head coach fired, another assistant coach leave in the middle of the season. You've had your best player traded. You've had players signed. You've had players released. You've had now injuries piled on top of it. Are you getting the sense that mentally and emotionally some players have been worn down by just everything that's happened this season, and then you lump another Sabonis injury on top of it? What's kind of I know DeRozan was talking yesterday during post game, and he kind of alluded to it's just been a long season. What are you kind of noticing from players when you interact with them?
Yeah, I don't know if that comes to mind. I think certainly that might be the case. It hasn't stuck out to me because I think players are really chomping at the bit to be able to compete with this team. I think there's opportunity that exists, and there's an excitement, but it's, for whatever reason, it's just a collection of guys, and they don't really play as a team quite yet. So I think they even recognize that, but I don't know if there's a mental fatigue. I think certainly that exists with a lot of the fan base because they've been put through the ringer, and I'm sympathetic to that. But I think it's also, I mean, selfishly, what kind of makes it fun. I think it makes it interesting. I think you kind of have to throw expectations out the window. Any expectations that you had prior to the season, you kind of have to throw that out the window when you trade a franchise player and fire your head coach. But I think this is what's kind of fun because you get to kind of see, what can be. And I think one of the biggest things, and I actually mentioned to Alan a couple weeks back, it's like, it may not be the team you want, but they have positioned themselves to where they have pieces that are here long term, and you don't really have a lot of crucial decisions you have to make. You have a collection of people that you can kind of build around, and I think that is exciting for this team. I think the players recognize that. I think to be able to go out there and see what somebody like Devin Carter is doing right now, finally having a moment in his rookie season that people have kind of waited for. I think people are starting to finally see wow, here's a glimpse into what could be for his NBA future and maybe even the next couple years here in Sacramento, should he remain. Somebody like Jake LaRavia, who they obviously will have a decision to make, and yeah, they're capped on what they can give him going forward, but if he, does anything that's worthwhile, it's going to benefit the Kings, and I think people are seeing that. But even with guys like DeRozan and LaVine playing together, those are just it. But you mentioned like Domas, like he's just so crucial, and certainly he's made. There's a report out there in terms of them having to have some clarity on where this team is going. I think it doesn't just exist for him. There's a lot of people within this organization that are going to have that same type of mindset because things are have been chaotic, and it has been a pressure type of season where there's a lot of things that happen outside of basketball that kind of give you pause as to what maybe the future holds. So I don't think it's exclusive to Domas. And by the way, dealing with the injuries, that poor guy went through just the ringer the other day before that Cavs game. I mean, I talked to him briefly last night. He got 6 stitches in the eye. He said it's ugly. I asked him about the ankle. He said it's uglier. It's swelling. It's, but I'm surprised. I think you guys probably are too, that reevaluating them in 10 days and maybe being out maybe 10 days is a lot less than what people thought, because that ankle injury looked crazy. But to your point, Kyle, I don't know. I don't totally necessarily read that when I'm talking to players. I do feel that there's a hunger and excitement level, and certainly just hey, let's just get in and see what can happen, because certainly we've seen teams go really deep into the playoffs, even if they're in the play-in situation. They want to be better than that, but I think it is just kind of is what it is at this point, and they're willing to accept that role.
Yeah, 6 stitches for Domas. I mean, you're a UFC guy, Sean. It looked like he just came out of a fight, man. Like
Yeah.
that was quite a gash, and then comes back and has the ankle injury. This is right after having the hamstring injury and only being back for a little over a game. Fan base is, as most fan bases do, living or dying with every win or loss. But obviously, this Cleveland game was probably the biggest win of the year for the Kings, right up there with the Boston game that you mentioned earlier. And funnily enough, no Domantas Sabonis or Zach LaVine in that win over Cleveland, and no De'Aaron Fox going back to that win in Boston, which Boston will have a chance at their revenge, and so will Cleveland, as the tough stretch of the tough final stretch of the Sacramento Kings season comes around. But Sean, when you look at like these good games, and keeping it specifically, I guess, since LaVine's been here, like the Houston game, I think about the Cleveland game, obviously falls in. What do you see when this Kings team is playing at their best? what do you feel like they are doing well? Like I've been trying to figure out what I would say the identity of this team is, or what you can expect them to do on a nightly basis. And I've had trouble, I guess, putting my finger on that. But when they have these good performances, what do you feel like they're doing well? And do you have any, sense of, do you gain any confidence from having these big games, even when they're followed up with that loss to Chicago?
I don't know if it gives me confidence, but I think what really stood out to me, and I think we mentioned it not long ago on our podcast, is the fact that even look that recent 4-game road trip, I think, is the one I circle. And clearly there wasn't. I mean, Denver obviously was is an elite opponent in that 4-game trip, but everyone else was kind of a little bit softer of an opponent. And then you go into the Clipper game that they lost right after that. To me, what stands out obviously is that level of compete, but particularly on the defensive end. And that 4-game trip, and again, I don't care who your opponent is, because I think they could have played like that against some of those lesser opponents and still been a monster to be able to compete with some of those elite teams. And I think you saw that. And granted, it didn't bear out in terms of wins and losses. They both lost the game in LA to the Clippers and as well to the Denver Nuggets. But the way they played in those 2 games, and I think when Doug Christie talks about the byproduct is winning, of how we play and how we compete, and winning would be the byproduct of that, doesn't always work. But I feel like the way they competed in those games, particularly on the defensive end, showed me what they were capable of, and kind of changed my mind, because I thought that this team was absolutely dreadful defensively going into that trip. I had already kind of made up my mind on that, and certainly they had strung probably a good 6-7 games together where that wasn't the case, and really kind of turned their fortunes around. So I think it starts there for them, especially for the identity of their coach. It may not be the identity that they have, but it's certainly the identity that they want to be a solid defensive team. They don't have to be an elite defensive team to be a winning basketball team in this league, but the way they score the ball, I mean, they can compete with anybody. They may not be a top 5 like I thought, because for certain things, maybe they're not as good of a 3-point shooting team, or maybe they're not as quick as they probably should be. But I still think that they can score with anyone. But I think it all just comes down to what they show defensively. And I went from thinking this team is not a good defensive team and won't be a good defensive team to one that has shown that they're capable of doing so. And I think Jake LaRavia, I think Jonas Valanciunas, the addition of Devin Carter, but certainly Keon Ellis, DeMar DeRozan, who isn't really known as a defensive player, showing to be a willing defender at times, and the way they kind of get into lanes has certainly helped. I mean, the steals are way up. That's always fun to see. So I think they've shown what they're capable of, and if they can somehow find a consistent level with that and maybe reach a top 15 in the league, I think that could, much like previous teams that were awful defensively, that could bode well for future success and being able to compete.
Yeah, agreed. Keegan Murray, definitely part of that group. And like you said, that road trip, they showed a lot on that end, and then, can revert pretty quickly, but you see that it's there for sure. That's Fox 40, Sean Cunningham. Sean, appreciate you coming on. Do you care about spoilers about what's going on in the tournament at all?
No, go ahead. Lay it on me.
Baylor looking like they're about to win their game, and I am hyped for the eventual. I'm rooting for Duke today.
Just today?
I don't have strong opinions on who wins, to be honest.
So
I want the prospect matchups. I want VJ Edgecombe, honestly, not even quite sure how to say it, against Cooper and the other 2 Duke dudes.
Yeah, well, I mean, it looks like Malik Brown's still going to be out for Duke with the shoulder. I mean, that's a tough injury. I mean, I in my mind, he's if not the best defender in the country, he's probably 2 or 3. But he means a lot to that team. I mean, he's going to be sorely missed. But get through the first couple rounds, Duke is way too talented. Certainly anything can happen in the tournament, but I got them as my champion. So, as I always do, I mean, I always do 2 brackets at least, one with my head and one with my heart. And Duke is always the one with my heart, but it's also with my head this year. I think they're the best team in the country, and I don't think Auburn's number 2. I think if there had to be another team that's going to win it all, look out for Florida.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. But all the SEC teams, that's the weird part. All the football schools all of a sudden can play basketball.
Yeah, 12 of them made it, right?
That's wild.
Yeah, it's crazy. I'm surprised we don't see you in the Duke polo and the blue Hurley hat today.
No, I don't have any of those laying around.
No,
I had to go
first round.
All Johnny Cash for you. I did wear my Bo Jackson shirt. You didn't know who Bo Jackson was for a while. So.
That is not quite true. It's
That is
I
somewhat
very
believe
true.
it.
Somewhat true.
So
Somewhat true. My dad would not be proud of me. Well,
No.
Sean Cunningham from Fox 40, appreciate you joining the show, man. Enjoy
guys.
the rest of your day. Best of luck.
Thanks,
to you.
buddy. See you later, buddy.
See you, man.
Guys.